What if the true reason Rome fell was not simply barbarians at the gates, but the corruption within its very heart? What if the real collapse began long before the city walls were breached? In the bedrooms, in the marriages, in the subtle shifts of how men and women chose each other, loved each other, and betrayed each other. The philosopher and Christian theologian St. Augustine, who lived through the final days of the Roman Empire, believed that the downfall of the greatest civilization in history was not just about armies or emperors. Instead, it was about the erosion of virtue, the way lust overtook loyalty, and how mating strategies shifted from building families to chasing pleasure. Today, we will uncover what the fall of Rome reveals about female mating strategies. Guided by Augustine's insights, you will see how unchecked desire, the breakdown of the family, and the pursuit of fleeting pleasures over lasting commitments created a society too weak to survive. And more importantly, you will see how these patterns repeat in our own world today. Part 1. Augustine's lens on Rome's collapse. When St. Augustine wrote The City of God after Rome was sacked in 410 AD, many Romans believed that their empire fell because they had abandoned the old gods. Augustine rejected this. He argued that Rome's decline was not about which gods they worshipped, but about how they lived. A society that worships lust instead of virtue will eventually collapse from within. For Augustine, the family was the foundation of civilization, and yet by the late empire, Roman family life was crumbling. Marriage had become less about lifelong loyalty and more about personal convenience. Wealth and status. Divorce was easy and common. Elite women often chose lovers based on ambition and resources rather than character. Men, weakened by their own indulgence, pursued mistresses and spectacles instead of virtue. Here lies Augustine's brutal insight. When desire is no longer ordered toward stability and creation, and when mating becomes about immediate gratification and society itself becomes fragile. The empire that once conquered the world became conquered by its own appetites. Now apply Augustine's warning to female mating strategies. In stable times, when families are strong, women often seek men who provide loyalty, protection, and a future. But in times of decadence and uncertainty, the strategy shifts. Women may pursue powerful men for resources, or exciting men for pleasure, knowing that the long-term bonds of marriage are already weak. Augustine saw this everywhere in Rome. The preference for charm and indulgence over duty and discipline. Rome's collapse revealed a cycle. As society grew more indulgent, men abandoned discipline. Women adapted their choices to short-term advantage, and families dissolved. Without the strength of families, the empire's moral backbone broke. Augustine warned that this was no accident. It was the inevitable result of misplaced desire. Part 2. Lust as the enemy of civilization. Augustine went further. He believed that lust is not just a personal weakness, it is a political weakness. For him, lust was more than sexual passion. It was the human tendency to let appetite rule over reason, to choose the easy pleasure instead of the difficult discipline. In Rome's prime, discipline built roads, armies, and laws. Men and women sacrificed for family and community. But in Rome's decline, indulgence replaced discipline. Gladiatorial games distracted men from virtue. Lavish feasts replaced military rigor. And in the realm of love, women and men alike began choosing partners for excitement, wealth, or social advantage instead of stability. Augustine pointed out that this collapse of sexual morality weakened the empire's ability to endure hardship. When families disintegrated, the empire lost the very citizens who should have been disciplined, loyal, and strong. Female mating strategies became more transactional, oriented toward survival in a decadent system. Rather than building something lasting, women aligned with men who could give them status or luxury, rather than men of virtue who could build a stable home. This is why Augustine saw lust as an enemy of civilization itself. It wasn't only about personal sin, it was about how desire reshapes society. When the strategy becomes choose the man who gives the most pleasure or the most wealth in the moment, the future is sacrificed for the present. Rome's fall then was not surprising. It was predictable. A civilization that elevates lust over virtue will eventually collapse, not from external enemies, but from within its own corrupted heart. And here is the haunting part. Augustine's warning was not just for Rome, it is for every society. When mating strategies shift away from loyalty and toward indulgence, the seeds of collapse are planted. The fall of Rome, Augustine tells us, is not just history, it is prophecy. Part 3, Female Power in Times of Collapse. One of Augustine's most striking observations about human society is that morality shifts when survival feels uncertain. In stable times, women may align their choices with long-term order, finding a husband who provides stability, loyalty, and resources for the family. But in a collapsing society, those old rules dissolve. What Augustine saw in Rome was that female power in mating strategies became sharper and more pragmatic during decline. Women of the Roman elite often used beauty and seduction to secure relationships with powerful men, senators, generals, wealthy merchants. It was not about building families, but about ensuring access to resources in a world that felt unstable. When the state itself is crumbling, the rational strategy is not to build a lasting household, but to grasp what advantages are available right now. Augustine did not see this as a sign of female weakness, but as a reflection of human appetite left unchecked by virtue. Yet this shift had devastating consequences. When women chose men not for their moral character but for their immediate power or wealth, it rewarded the wrong kind of men. Instead of noble leaders, Rome elevated ambitious schemers. Instead of disciplined fathers, it rewarded corrupt officials. The choices women made, Augustine argued, shaped the moral tone of the society itself. This, Augustine believed, is one of the great truths of human history. A civilization falls when desire dictates more than virtue, and when women adapt to chaos by seeking short-term advantage rather than building long-term households. It may be rational in the moment, but it corrodes the future. The family ceases to be a sacred unit of loyalty and becomes instead a stage for appetite, status, and transaction. Rome's fall revealed that female power in mating is not small. It is civilizational. When women adjusted to chaos by prioritizing immediate survival and indulgence, the long-term stability of Rome evaporated. Augustine warned that this is not unique to Rome. It is the fate of every society that forgets that virtue, not pleasure, is the foundation of endurance. Part 4. The corruption of marriage. For Augustine, marriage was sacred, not merely a contract between two individuals, but the cornerstone of society. Yet by the time of Rome's decline, marriage had been hollowed out. Divorce was widespread. Adultery was normalized among the elite. Marriages were arranged not for love or loyalty, but for political advantage and material gain. What Augustine found most destructive was that marriage had become a stage for lust rather than a school for virtue. Husbands and wives no longer saw each other as partners in raising families and building communities. Instead, they sought escape from one another in affairs, banquets, and pleasures. The stability that marriage once provided was gone. And here we see again how female mating strategies shifted in this context. When marriage loses its sacredness, women no longer expect loyalty from men, nor do they give it in return. Instead, marriage becomes a tool, a way to secure inheritance, wealth, or temporary status. A woman might marry a wealthy man but pursue passion with another. A man might marry for social alliance while keeping concubines for pleasure. Augustine argued that this was not love at all. It was transaction disguised as partnership. The corruption of marriage weakened Rome more than any barbarian army. A society where husbands and wives cannot trust one another is a society without foundations. Augustine saw in this the true cause of Rome's collapse. The family had lost its meaning, and so the empire lost its strength. He warned that when marriage ceases to restrain lust, lust consumes marriage. And when marriage collapses, civilization collapses. Female mating strategies adapted to this reality by focusing on short-term gain rather than long-term loyalty. But in doing so, the very possibility of enduring love and family was sacrificed. Rome fell not just because its legions were defeated, but because its families had already fallen apart from within. Part 5. The triumph of pleasure over duty. At the heart of Augustine's philosophy is a question. Do we live for pleasure, or do we live for duty? Rome, he argued, once lived for duty. Its citizens built roads, defended the state, and sacrificed their personal desires for the good of the community. But in its final centuries, Rome shifted. Pleasure became more important than duty, and once that shift was complete, the empire's fate was sealed. Augustine saw this especially in the realm of sex and relationships. Women who once sought strong husbands to build stable families began seeking lovers who brought them excitement, wealth, or novelty. Men who once disciplined themselves for war and politics now pursued indulgence. In games, banquets, and mistresses, the mating strategies of both sexes reflected the deeper truth. Rome no longer prized virtue, it prized pleasure. The triumph of pleasure over duty destroyed loyalty. If a man is chosen not because he is loyal but because he is wealthy, then when his wealth disappears, so does the relationship. If a woman is desired not for her loyalty, but for her beauty, then when her beauty fades, so does her value in the eyes of men. This is the logic of lust. It consumes quickly and leaves nothing behind. Augustine believed that a society that elevates pleasure above duty is already dead, even if its walls still stand. For what keeps a civilization strong is not its monuments, but its values. And when pleasure becomes the highest value, then all other commitments to family, to virtue, to God are sacrificed. In Augustine's eyes, this was the tragedy of Rome. Its people sought pleasure instead of duty, and in doing so, they lost both. Female mating strategies in this climate reflected the same tragedy. Loyalty and sacrifice no longer mattered. Only the thrill of the moment mattered. And when the moment was gone, so too was the strength of the empire. Part 6. Desire and the illusion of freedom. Augustine was not blind to the fact that people often believed they were free when they were actually slaves to their desires. He argued that true freedom is not the ability to do whatever one wants, but the ability to rule over one's passions. Rome, in its decline, mistook indulgence for freedom. Citizens thought they were liberated because they could chase every appetite. Yet in Augustine's eyes, they had simply traded discipline for slavery to lust. This illusion of freedom played out clearly in female mating strategies. Roman women of the elite often celebrated their independence by moving from one lover to another, controlling marriages or manipulating alliances. To the outside observer, it looked like power and liberation. But Augustine saw something darker. It was not freedom, but enslavement to desire. For when choices are governed by lust rather than reason, the chooser is no longer free, they are captive to passion. Men were no better. They boasted of freedom while drowning in indulgence. They mistook conquest of women for strength, when in reality, their appetites conquered them. In this sense, both men and women became prisoners of their own strategies. What appeared to be empowerment was in fact bondage, for the desires they served did not lead to stability, but to ruin. Augustine's lesson here is chilling. When society mistakes indulgence for freedom, collapse is inevitable. Rome's women and men believed they were free in love, free in pleasure, free in marriage. Yet this false freedom dissolved families, eroded loyalty, and weakened the empire. The illusion of freedom is perhaps more dangerous than outright oppression, because those enslaved by passion believe they are liberated, even as their world crumbles around them. Part 7. The eternal warning of Rome. Augustine never wrote about Rome's fall as something unique to his age. He wrote as if to warn every future society, do not make the same mistake. He insisted that civilizations rise when desire is ordered toward virtue, and fall when lust rules over loyalty. The decline of Rome was for him not just history but a parable, a story meant to be repeated unless its lessons were heeded. When female mating strategies shift toward indulgence and transaction, it signals that the foundations of society are weakening. For if women no longer seek men of loyalty, strength, and virtue, but instead pursue wealth, charm, or power in the moment, then men are rewarded for being exploiters, not builders. Families dissolve, children grow without stability, and the moral core of society erodes. Rome teaches us this with brutal clarity. Augustine's prophecy rings true even now. Look at the modern world. Rising divorce rates. Marriages formed and dissolved quickly. Relationships driven by excitement rather than endurance. The same patterns Augustine saw in Rome, the corruption of marriage, the triumph of pleasure over duty, the illusion of freedom in desire, are alive today. And if they remain unchecked, the outcome will be the same. Rome fell not in a single night, but over generations of indulgence. The same seeds lie hidden in modern culture, waiting to grow into collapse. The choice before us. Augustine left behind a haunting truth. Civilizations are not destroyed from without until they are weakened from within. And nothing weakens a society faster than the corruption of love, marriage, and family. The fall of Rome reveals more than political decline. It reveals how the deepest human choices about love and desire shaped the fate of entire nations. Female mating strategies in Rome adapted to a world of decadence and collapse, and in doing so, they contributed to the empire's destruction. Augustine saw this clearly. When women and men alike choose passion over duty, when families dissolve in pursuit of pleasure, the empire's doom is already written. But Augustine's warning is also an invitation, for he did not believe that lust must rule us. He believed that reason, virtue, and discipline can order desire toward something higher, toward loyalty, toward love, toward God. The lesson of Rome is not just despair, it is a call to choose differently. As we look at our own age, we must ask, are we repeating Rome's mistakes? Are our relationships driven by indulgence rather than loyalty, by transaction rather than trust? If so, Augustine would say the collapse has already begun. But if we reclaim virtue, if we reorder desire, if we rebuild families on loyalty and strength, then perhaps we can escape the fate of Rome. The fall of Rome is not just history, it is a mirror. And in that mirror, Augustine challenges us to see not only what destroyed Rome, but what may yet destroy us, unless we have the courage to choose differently.